Summer, 1940, France. After the fall of Paris, German forces occupy the north, while the newly established Vichy regime governs the unoccupied south. The nation becomes not only a battlefield, but also a marketplace of greed, betrayal, and survival. As Nazi control deepens, French industry is turned to producing vehicles, ammunition, and supplies for the occupiers. While some resist and others submit, a few of the country's most powerful men actively collaborate, trading loyalty for influence and protection. Among them stands an industrialist, once hailed as a national hero, a pioneer of modern automobiles, and the creator of France's first tank. During the occupation, his factories will produce tens of thousands of vehicles for the German army, making him a symbol of collaboration and betrayal. His name is Louis Renault. Louis Renault, the youngest of 6 children in a wealthy bourgeois family, was born on the 12th of February 1877 in Paris. From an early age, he was fascinated by mechanics. While other boys played outside, Louis spent hours tinkering with engines, experimenting with electricity, and sketching designs. By his teenage years, he had set up a small workshop at the family's country house in Billancourt, on the outskirts of Paris, where he obsessively modified engines and studied the latest developments in automobiles. In December 1898, Renault unveiled his first car, a small machine he called the voiturette. It featured a revolutionary direct-drive gearbox, which he later patented. That same month, he demonstrated it by driving up the steep slope of Rue Le Pic in Montmartre, a hill in northern Paris, winning a bet with friends who doubted his invention. More importantly, the demonstration brought him 13 orders on the spot, marking the true beginning of his career as a manufacturer. In February 1899, Louis officially went into business with his brothers Marcel and Fernand, forming Renault Frères. Marcel oversaw administration, while Fernand managed sales, leaving Louis free to focus entirely on engineering. The timing was perfect. Automobiles were still novelties, but races across Europe gave manufacturers a way to showcase their innovations. The Renault brothers threw themselves into racing, with Marcel often behind the wheel. Victories brought publicity, and orders quickly followed. Before long, Renault cars were being exported to Britain, New York, and even as far as Buenos Aires, proof that the company had become an international. Tragedy struck in 1903, when Marcel was killed in the Paris-Madrid race. Fernand, already in poor health, retired soon after and died in 1909. Louis, still only in his early 30s, became the sole head of the company. From then on, Renault cars carried not just his name, but his iron will. He admired Henry Ford, who had pioneered modern production methods in America, and Renault introduced similar systems in France. Like Ford, he was authoritarian, demanding, and intolerant of dissent. The First World War, which lasted from the 28th of July 1914 to the 11th of November 1918, saw Renault's factories shift almost overnight to military production. They turned out shells, trucks, aircraft engines, and eventually the revolutionary Renault FT tank. This light mobile machine became one of the most important weapons of the conflict and cemented Renault's reputation as a patriot of the production line. For his contribution to victory, he was decorated as a Grand Officer of the Legion of Honor. By the 1920s, Renault was not only incredibly rich and powerful, but also feared. Workers at his vast factory named him the Ogre of Billancourt, a reflection of his reputation as a domineering and ruthless employer. He demanded loyalty, tolerated no unions, and kept a strict system of surveillance over his workforce. Strikes were crushed, workers were searched as they left the factory, and anyone caught distributing union propaganda was fired. At the same time, Renault married Christiane Boulère, 20 years his junior. 2 years later, they had their only son, Jean-Louis. Despite his wealth and influence, Renault's private life was often turbulent, shaped by his authoritarian personality and suspicion of others. Renault kept homes on Avenue Foch, one of the most prestigious streets in Paris and among the most expensive addresses in the world, as well as at the Château de Erqueville, a vast country estate. The chateau fronted more than 3 kilometers of the Seine, with ground spanning 4,000 hectares. Renault's staff entered the residence through a private tunnel. He also competed fiercely with his great rival, André Citroën, whom he insultingly referred to as the Little Jew. Though he despised Citroën personally, he relished their rivalry. When Citroën's company collapsed in 1934 after expanding too quickly, Renault admitted with a grin that he almost regretted the victory, as competing with Citroën had pushed him to improve his own factories. On the 30th of January 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany by President Paul von Hindenburg. In the years that followed, the Nazi regime rearmed the country and projected an image of unstoppable modernization. Louis Renault, one of France's wealthiest and most powerful industrialists, took a keen interest in this transformation. In February 1935, he traveled to Berlin and met Hitler in person. Convinced that peace in Europe could be preserved through economic cooperation, Renault argued for closer Franco-German ties. His admiration for German industrial efficiency left him blind to the true nature of Nazi ambitions. While Renault admired authoritarian efficiency abroad, unrest was brewing at home. In 1936, Renault workers joined the mass strikes that followed the election of the Popular Front, a left-wing coalition that introduced paid leave, collective bargaining, and the 40-hour workweek. For Louis, these movements confirmed his deep suspicion of communism and reinforced his authoritarian instincts. The Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. In the months before, Renault's factories had supplied tanks, trucks, and aircraft engines to the French army. In the spring of 1940, Renault traveled to the United States to negotiate tank production for the French army. When he returned a few weeks later, the German invasion was already underway. Within months, Paris had fallen, and his empire was at the mercy of the Nazi conquerors. During the 4 years of occupation, Renault's factories produced more than 34,000 vehicles for the German army. He justified this by claiming that continued production kept his workers employed and prevented them from being deported to Germany. He reportedly told a friend, "It is better to give them the butter, or they will take the cows." Whether this was an act of pragmatism, collaboration, or both, remains one of the most debated aspects of his legacy. Renault's empire became an essential link in the German supply chain. Trucks rolled off the lines and were dispatched to the Eastern Front, where they carried soldiers and supplies deep into the Soviet Union. To the Germans, Renault was useful. To the resistance, he was a symbol of betrayal. Underground pamphlets denounced him by name, calling him a profiteer who served the occupiers while others risked their lives in the fight. The Allies also took note. On the 3rd of March 1942, British bombers attacked Renault's main plant outside Paris, killing around 350 civilians. To the resistance, the destruction was justified. They believed Renault had put his entire factory in service of the enemy. To ordinary Parisians, the sight of smoking ruins and rows of coffins raised new questions about whether Renault had crossed the line from reluctant industrialist to active collaborator. Some historians later argued that sabotage was quietly encouraged inside the factories. Trucks destined for the front sometimes broke down after only a few weeks, and engines seized in the harsh conditions of the Eastern Front. Whether Renault himself approved these acts of resistance remains uncertain. Supporters point to these failures as evidence of quiet defiance, while critics insist that they were nothing more than mechanical flaws and wishful thinking. What was beyond dispute was that Renault became one of the most visible faces of collaboration. A man once decorated for his role in the First World War was now reviled as a traitor in the Second. On the 6th of June 1944, under the code name Operation Overlord, US, British, and Canadian troops crossed the English Channel and began landing on the Normandy coast in France. By the liberation of Paris in August 1944, Renault's reputation was already ruined. In late September, he turned himself in to the authorities, insisting that he had acted only to protect his company and its employees. He denied making war profits and rejected the label of traitor. Nevertheless, he was imprisoned in Fresnes, a town just outside Paris, where the prison had been notorious during the occupation for housing resistance fighters and political prisoners. Renault's health quickly deteriorated. Louis Renault was 67 years old when he died on the 24th of October 1944, only a month after his arrest at a private clinic in Paris. The official cause of death was recorded as uremia, but his widow and an eyewitness later claimed he had been beaten, tortured, and murdered in prison. An X-ray taken after his death revealed a fractured vertebra, and a nun who worked at Fresnes testified that she had seen him collapse after being struck by a guard, with a jailer wielding a helmet. Whether he died of illness or violence has never been conclusively proven. After his death, prosecutors accused Renault not of military treason, but of economic collaboration. In France, this meant willingly providing the enemy with material support for its war effort. Unlike companies that had slowed their output or engaged in passive resistance, Renault's factories had run continuously, producing thousands of vehicles that the German army desperately needed. Whether out of pragmatism, fear, or ambition, Renault's decisions during those 4 years gave his accusers powerful evidence that he had collaborated with the Nazis more openly than most of his peers. In January 1945, the French provisional government seized Renault's factories, nationalized them, and transformed the company into state property. Unlike other industrialists accused of collaboration, Renault's heirs received no compensation. His widow and son were left with nothing, even though small shareholders were reimbursed. The family fought for decades to clear his name, but successive governments refused to reopen the case. By 1956, Renault was France's largest nationalized company, employing 51,000 Frenchmen, making 200,000 automobiles and a profit of $11 million per year. Historians remain divided to this day. Some view Renault as a willing collaborator who enriched himself under Nazi occupation. Others argue he was a scapegoat, targeted so the French state could take over one of the country's most valuable companies. Evidence that he sabotaged vehicles for the Germans or secretly resisted remains disputed.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.